Hello, my name is Mr. Baker. This is the very beginning of the 6th unit for my environmental science class. We're going to talk about water resources and pollution. Last unit we talked about the hydrosphere and the atmosphere. And so we talked a little bit about where the water is located on the planet, and we talked about how it's managed on larger scales. In this unit, we're going to talk primarily about where we get our drinking water from, how drinking water is controlled, and pollutants that actually affect our drinking water specifically. So the questions we're going to ask today are: what standards are used in regulating potable water? Potable means drinkable. Non-potable, you don't want to drink it. It's not fit for drinking. And then how do scientists ensure that water quality is within those standards? So some of these standards are going to be a level where we want the tests to give us values higher than the level, and sometimes those tests are going to give us results that are lower than those levels. Right, so a differentiation we didn't make last unit, but we talked about a lot of the stuff, is groundwater versus surface water. Groundwater is what it sounds like. It's water that's in the ground. So aquifers, right? Surface water are water sources that are on the very surface of the earth. So we're talking lakes, streams, rivers, creeks, reservoirs, ponds, water collection sites where they are collecting rainwater, right? Most of the time, humans pull their drinking water from surface water and then from aquifers after that. Some individuals privately own a well that might tap into an aquifer, or a city might tap into an aquifer to bolster its surface water resources. Right here in America, the EPA and the FDA work together for water quality standards. The EPA talks about city-based drinking water. The FDA talks about bottled water if you're drinking bottled water, right? The FDA primarily has the same standards as the EPA, and they just regulate selling it. Right, so the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is what has the teeth necessary to enforce the federal legislation on water quality standards, primarily through the Safe Water Act, and the Clean Water Act. And here in America, we also have state-level standards and even local standards for drinking water. And each of those would also have its own method for enforcing the legislation, right? But primarily, we are going to test for a few different things. Chemical contaminants and microbial contaminants are the biggest threats to our drinking water. So chemical contaminants, we're talking chemicals. Arsenic and lead are primary pollutants that, when they get into the drinking water, can affect the health of individuals. Nitrates and volatile or organic contaminants will also do that. Synthetic organic contaminants will as well. So we're talking plastics as well as things that will break down in the water and cause and are toxic to humans. Microbial contaminants, we're primarily looking at bacteria here. Things like E. coli, Cryptosporidium, and Legionella. So Legionella causes Legionnaire's disease. E. coli you've probably heard about before. Cryptosporidium is a bacteria that will make you very sick if you drink too much of it, or even like just a little bit, really. So we're testing to make sure that our levels for these things are lower than the standard says, right? So we don't want too much lead in our water. We don't want too much bacteria in our water. And we do this by doing testing, right? So local water tests are done when the local municipalities are in charge of distributing the water. State testing will also happen on those same water sources to make sure it's within the parameters. While the EPA is a federal enforcement agency, it primarily relies on states to uphold themselves to those, and then metes out punishment for those that don't. All right, so the large takeaways I want you to get is that water is regularly tested. So samples are taken on a regular basis, usually every year, and then a different kind of tests on like a 5-year cycle. So these regular sampling intervals allow for careful monitoring, and these are the official ones. The actual companies or uh, groups that are in charge of distributing the water are going to be doing their own testing much more frequently than this. This is the formal test by the government that says, is this water clean enough, right? So it's happening on a regular basis. And then they're not just doing one big test, they're doing a bunch of different tests for different contaminants. So you can see on the picture below me, you can see a pH test being done on water to check to make sure it is not too acidic and not too alkaline. And also a coliform test, that's a bacterial test to check if there are coliform bacteria in the water. And you can see that it's done with a simple indicator with color to say if it is there, which would be positive, or not there, which would be negative. Now, we also test for things like turbidity, which is the cloudiness of the water, which could be from multiple different sources, right? So turbidity is how clear or cloudy the water is, and you can see that they have a actual chart that they can compare a reading to. So if they hold the test tube up to the top one and it looks slightly blurry, they can see if it looks closer to the 40 JTU or the 100 JTU, and that's going to tell them certain things about how to fix the turbidity in that water sample. Right? And these thresholds are going to be set at different points. We have parts per million and parts per billion. So a 1 in a million chance would be similar to parts per million, and a 1 in a billion chance would be similar to parts per billion. So parts per million is bigger than parts per billion, all right? Like a quarter versus a tenth, but on a much smaller scale. All right. So we talked a little bit about the standards used in regulating potable water. We talked a little bit about how scientists ensure that water quality is within those standards. This week, if you're in my class, you're going to keep working towards answering these questions and delving a little bit more in depth to it. As always, keep learning, keep asking questions. Have a good one.